Welcome to the Daoscape Arts podcast. This is part 3 of a 3-part podcast titled The Shaolin Solution, which was recorded whilst relaxing at ZhiHua Temple in Beijing, China, with British Shaolin Kungfu coach AJ Donnely. AJ arrived in China in 1999 in pursuit of his dream to study Kung Fu at the Shaolin Temple. This episode looks at the current condition of traditional Chinese Kung Fu, the difficulty of testing the true potential of Shaolin Kung Fu, meeting the psychological expectations of a Kung Fu practice, finding an authentic Kung Fu teacher, and bringing Kung Fu insights into one's everyday life. So maybe we can have a look at this idea of traditional Chinese Kung Fu and what's behind that. And we've already talked about persistence. What does it mean for you, the spirit of Kung Fu and, persistence, and what those guys are doing? Like you said, they're teaching their students something, a kind of like an ethic, could we say, like a way of relating to the world. And what's that spirit for you, and what insight do you think you've gained from doing Shaolin Kung Fu?
It's most basic. The idea of, and I'll focus on the spirit of Shaolin, which is in essence Kung Fu. When Kung Fu, as I'm sure you translate Kung Fu as anything that has been built up through time and effort.
Right.
So there's the joke, you can have a Kung Fu of cookery or a Kung Fu of computer IT. The idea is if you've built up a skill through persistent time and effort, that is your Kung Fu.
Yeah.
So you apply that to Chinese martial arts. You can only have a skill in Chinese martial arts if you have Kung Fu, which means you have spent time and effort to develop your abilities in that.
So what are these Chinese, traditional Chinese Kung Fu artists who are getting beaten up by this MMA star? What kind of Kung Fu are they cultivating in their life? What's it doing for them, really?
I would say, and again, I haven't read their biographies, and I don't know so much about them.
Yeah.
I just know the first one was Tai Chi, and the second one was Wing Chun, Yong Chuan, I think in Mandarin.
Yong Chun Chuan. Yeah.
Yes, there you go. They're focusing on the forms, on the beauty and the aesthetics of them. And I mean, it's like the Tai Chi guy was saying about, using his energy to defeat it. Really, how often have you stress tested that with people who aren't your students?
Yeah.
If you go to any martial arts class and all you ever do is pit student versus student of the same school, all you're going to learn to do is take the punches that your school is teaching and to block the punches that your school is teaching. I mean, that's the whole point of MMA, combining the best aspects of different martial arts into what some would say is the ultimate fighting style. I won't agree or disagree, I've never trained MMA. But yeah, you have to test your art in a variety of safe, controlled environments so that you know that what you're doing is not just confined to your school. But that's what I'm feeling, looking at those 2 fights that he's had so far. That's what those traditional masters have been doing. They've been focusing on the form and thinking that, just by practicing this technique, I'll be able to apply this technique. Well, no, it doesn't work that way. Being able to having the correct technique is just the very first step. Once you have this technique, so this is a block, then you need to develop the speed of that block, the accuracy of that block, the power of the block, the hardness of the block, and again, there we go again, the cruelty of the block. If you haven't trained those 5 aspects on each technique, you are never going to win a fight against anyone who has any kind of training.
I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I've heard or read in a book somewhere that, China had this idea of testing, one school challenging another school, and if someone broke their arm, they could repair the arm, no problem. And there was this kind of idea of, martial arts is a brutal kind of path to take in China, but even if you get beaten up, they can kind of repair you. I know at a school where I was doing the standing yoga training, while I was standing there, a couple of guys came to challenge the school's method. It seems, I'm not sure exactly how formally. Well, let's hold on a minute. But I'm not sure how formally the guys challenged them. But they, the guy who was the school's kind of champion, who was used as a kind of punching bag but his skill was very excellent. He was pushing these guys into bushes and things, but he wasn't being brutal with them at all. I mean, they were doing a kind of like a pseudo push hand sparring type activity. But I'm thinking, like, in the past, even before there were, for example, guns in China, because there was the Boxer Rebellion in China, wasn't there, when the Chinese rose up with their kind of Qigong Kung Fu powers, and then they got shot. And I'm thinking, just before there were guns, I mean, I'm suspecting that the training and the way the schools were organized was very different. And I think because the Chinese are so fluid and adaptable, that as soon as the gun came in and you took over everything, maybe it changed everything in terms of how Chinese were thinking about martial arts and social conflict. Do you have any angle on that?
Yeah, I mean, because back in the day, you're looking at 200, 300, 400 years ago, life and death was decided by martial arts.
Right.
Both in terms of poverty, you could rise out of poverty by having martial arts. You could send your child to a martial arts school, give them a small amount of money to pay for the kid's food and board, have him train martial arts, then he could rise up through life by mastering that. And then you would, like you said, you'd have these constant challenges where other martial arts schools would come and challenge you, and you'd have to prove yourself. So again, it would be life and death situations we based on that, which is where I believe our idea of modern competitions come from. What we have now as point systems would originally have been those kind of actual life and death, real, serious injury type situations. But then as guns developed and, knives became more prevalent and everyone could just buy any kind of weapon they wanted to, it became less and less important. And obviously as the standard of living would rise and education for everybody would become more accessible, the importance of martial arts would go down and down and down.
Yeah. So I think part of this kind of kung fu dream that some people in the West have is it's rooted in something that I think actually very possibly existed in the past, and I think now that MMA's come along and is supposedly the ultimate, in UFC is supposedly the ultimate fighting championship, even though you see guys getting like tackled with single leg, double leg takedowns, and guys elbowing them on the back of the neck, or hammer fisting them on the back of the neck, and that being declared illegal, or guys with like two knees and a hand down on the floor being kneed in the head, that being declared illegal. I'm suspecting that actually Chinese martial arts had solutions to those kinds of attacks, and probably still do, and yet, as you said, safe testing environments are important, and you can't. And I know this is one of those standard arguments you hear on YouTube, for example, on martial arts videos of my kung fu's too brutal to be tested or to But I think there is a very real dimension to martial arts there. That if you do specialize in an art that uses knives, for example, I mean. It's just it's a fact. I mean, you can. I know people suit up with like white overalls and with red pens and things and try and but it's still, the psychology will be completely different because that pen isn't going to puncture your body. So there are limitations to how much you can test these things at the end of the day. And sparring is sparring, and that a boxing ring or an octagon is what it is. It isn't an ultimate fighting environment, really.
Until we have holodecks, there's never going to be an environment in which we can do that 100%.
Yeah, and
unless
even so, the
you're a
holodecks
soldier.
will change the psychology as well, right? So,
only soldiers and police and people who on a daily basis face life and death situations can ever know if the kind of training they do is going to work or not.
And even police, I mean, they've got to use restraint, right? So, I mean, they can't just go around just shooting whoever. I mean, in America it has been happening, hasn't it? But
Well, I'm talking about how like hand-to-hand combat.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, sure,
Because the gun will always win.
yeah. Yeah, and so this idea of I like this idea of like the discipline of Kung Fu and the discipline of Zen arts, demanding something from the practitioner. So, like you said, you went with these students to the temple a couple of weeks ago, and they have to kind of, like you said, they have to kind of say on the form whether they're actually 100% in it or not.
Yeah.
And they have to kind of conform to a certain kind of schedule of training. And even if we do it in our own lives, even if it's not at the temple, if it's our own personal path, we have to kind of change ourselves and change our lives in order to meet the expectations of the practice.
Yes.
And so you could say in some ways that the art itself cultivates the practitioner. The art does the practitioner rather than the practitioner does the art. Have you had any experience of that yourself, of like having to kind of almost surrender? In Buddhism and in meditation, and in yoga, right? In the corpse pose at the end of yoga sessions, often they just say, okay, now lie down and just surrender to your nature.
Well, it's like swimming, isn't it? The more you fight in swimming, or a sand pit, for example, you're going to sink. The idea is to be still, and then you'll float.
Sure, yeah.
And so with Chinese martial arts, like the classic horse stance, Ma Bu,
Right.
the first time the students do it, they're always in agonizing pain, and they're only halfway down. So the idea is for the calves and the thighs to be at a 90-degree angle, but they usually only get to about 45 before the pain starts. And I say, no, you have to tell your muscles to release, because it's the muscles tensing that's causing so much pain.
Right.
So you're better off just releasing as much as possible, getting to 90, and then holding it, because you're going to build much more strength that way, and you're not going to tire yourself out so quickly.
So that's very much a kind of yoga aspect to the Shaolin training, right? It's kind of like a kind of opening the body and releasing.
It's 100% about opening. Same with stretching.
Right.
In the Shaolin stretching set, you're in the splits, and your muscles, because they're feeling the tension, and your hips and your joints, they all start freezing up because they're like, oh no, I'm going to break something if I keep going down.
Yeah.
And you literally have to say to your hips and your joints and your ligaments, relax, just let go, 舍得 in Chinese. This is of just letting go, holding on to nothing, letting your body just be completely released. Well, I'm glad we're recording this. I'm going to write that shit down. That's awesome. Yeah, like Buddhism itself, the idea is to let go of everything, to let go of your body, and to let it be completely free.
Yeah.
And that's what you have to do when you're training martial arts, when you're stretching, all these things, because that's how the body becomes completely open.
So would you say in your training you've had these kinds of experiences yourself, where you've had to feel that you really have to surrender to something that's quite imposing or daunting for you to have to embrace?
Everyday life. Everyday life.
Yeah.
Whether it's, like I said, having fights on social media with people who have ignorant or uneducated, I should say, opinions on things, I just want to start firing back at them and saying, no, you're an idiot, you don't know what you're talking about. But I have to let go of the idea that people should see the world the same way I see it. I need to let go of that idea and just present the information and say, this is what it is. I'm not forcing you to take this. I'm not forcing my truth upon you. I'm just saying, this is the truth that I have. This is the truth that I've experienced. This is the truth that I know. You can take a look at it, and that's your choice. Whatever brings you happiness in life, that's great for you. Just, I would prefer it if your opinion doesn't bring suffering onto others.
Right.
But yeah, you have to let go of everything.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you will just lose your mind. But that's the idea of Buddhism and how it's related to martial arts. Whoop, whoop.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the major attractions of Kung Fu is there's no real arguing with it. If it works, it works, and it's kind of like actions speak louder than words. And not only in terms of like fighting, it's just also as a health system, because I think there's also that deeper dimension, you know, like you were saying, about the mind as well, and maybe, you know, self-defense and dealing with negative forces begins with how we relate to our minds and bodies, even before you meet some thug on the street, for example. So, you know, the punches and the kicks can come in the form of even our own thoughts about ourselves, or just some words from another person, or even just a look from another person, right?
There's no expectations.
Right.
Whether you're going to go and see the latest movie, or, you know, dealing with a thug on the street, you have to have that idea of no expectations. Because when you have no expectations, you're in a neutral place, and then you can just handle the world as it comes at you.
Right.
Whether it's a crap movie or someone, you know, throwing a bottle at you.
Right. I think in Taoism they call this like emptiness, right?
Yes.
It's kind of like the window has utility because it's empty. Or
Yes.
The cup has, right? Yeah. This kind of idea. And so if you're empty, then you're ready. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. But obviously that's the highest level that you need to reach. And obviously it's the hardest to reach because you have to let go of everything. You have to release your body, release your expectations, release your attachments, everything. Because when that's basically what enlightenment is.
Right.
As far as I understand it.
Do you have a procedure that you kind of use? So, for example, if you're on the street and it's quite a stressful environment on the street, do you have like a kind of set of kind of like a system that you go through to help you practice?
I work my way up through my body. So, and this is taught at the temple, you center by walking. And so as you step, you feel the sole of your foot touching the floor. So you start there, so you're connecting with the floor, you're rooting, both mentally and physically. So you're stepping, okay, I'm feeling the floor, and then you're feeling the joints as they connect to your foot. And then you're working your mind up through your body, feeling each part as is attached to bring you back into the moment. Because the thing with fear or surprise or expectations is they're always something outside the body. They're always a projection onto someone else or something else or a future that hasn't happened yet. That's what an expectation is. So the idea is to bring yourself back inside your body by connecting with the ground and building up to that from there. And then you say, okay, here I am. I'm back inside my body. And from here I can see 360 around me and have awareness of what's going on.
Do you use the breath much at all, or?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's a complete package. So with each step, you know, you have the in and out breathing to Dantian,
Right.
and then the microcosm of like the breath going up and down in a circle around you. But that, I mean, that's more Taoist than it is Buddhist. But yeah, it's all part of the same thing when it comes to the mind-body connection in terms of your environment.
Yeah. So do you have a qigong practice that you do as well, or?
I don't do as much qigong as I should, because from my understanding and in my experience, that's a big chunk of a day.
Oh.
I mean, you're looking at like an hour's practice in order to start having noticeable effects.
Wow.
It's like going to the gym and just lifting one weight for 5 minutes, as opposed to going there and doing like a whole hour and a half. You go and do an hour and a half session for 3 months and you'll start seeing a big change. If you're lifting one weight for 5 minutes. So fitting in a useful portion of Qigong is much more difficult.
Right. I've got all these questions coming up in my mind about all these magical claims, you know, some of these Kung Fu masters, but I'm not going to go down that route because
there's always so many branches of the tree.
I know. I wanted to ask also, you know, this thing about authentic Kung Fu teachers. I mean, okay, we've got Shaolin and we've got some masters there, and I'm guessing, you know, there's some good ones and there's some bad ones, there's some lazy ones and there's some clever ones who can get insight, you know, and maybe take the Buddhism aspect more seriously, and maybe some of the others take the kind of like maybe the competitive sparring aspect a bit more seriously. What's your opinion on like authentic kind of Buddhist spiritual Kung Fu in China and finding good enough teachers and resources for that?
Number one, it comes down to, again, what do you want? I mean, how do you define authentic? Do you want someone who can teach you how to win a fight? Then you say, well, has this teacher ever won a fight before, you know?
Yeah.
Have they ever done this thing? Or I want someone who can teach me to have the most beautiful Tai Chi form. Have they won any competitions to show they have the most beautiful Tai Chi form? You know? Or I want a more spiritual developed side. And you say, okay, what is their history? I have a conversation with them. Do I get a sense of spiritual and depth and connection when I'm talking to this person? So that's where you'd start from. Does this person have what I need to learn? And how do I know they have that thing?
Do you feel these kind of people are abundant in China, and it's easy to find them, or?
In terms of fighting, traditionally, as in using traditional styles to fight, I would say no. I would say they're very, very rare for the reasons that we've just discussed earlier. They're not training them. Do these teachers train the things that you want to learn? If they're not training them, then how could they possibly teach you?
Yeah.
You know, if they don't have experience in the things that you want to learn, how can they teach you?
Yeah. I think around the Cultural Revolution as well, like those schools I think they were seen as a threat, but also as a kind of haven of traditional culture. So they kind of really clamped down on it all. I mean, so maybe that's part of it as well.
I would also compare it to relationships. If you are the kind of person who falls in love with, can marry and have a perfect life with the first person you meet, then you're an amazing individual. And, you know, I raise my hands to you and I say, you know, how the hell did you do it? I think for the majority of people, it's going to take you several tries, whether that try is, you know, 6 months or 5 years, before you find your soulmate, your partner for life, you know? And I think it's the same with martial arts or with spiritualism in general. You have to go to several different teachers and test
until you
them.
find what you want. Yes,
exactly. You need to find the person you gel with. And I've met people who have been training with the same teacher for the past 20 years. And I say, well, how do you know that what this teacher says is true? Have you been to other schools?
Yeah.
Have you tried with other teachers? And they say, well, no, I found this one and it made sense to me. And I was like, okay, if that makes you happy, that's fine. But I think you have to try several different places, either at the same time or one by one, before you find, okay, that clicks. Me and the teacher, we have a good rapport. You know, the training fits my style, my schedule, you know, what it is I'm looking for.
Yeah. I think actually, you know, as well, like some people just want a fantasy world to kind of, I mean, I even saw that at the White Cloud Temple headquarters of Taoism in Beijing, you know, there's just it's like all these people in costumes, in Tai Chi costumes, you know, and they're having photos of themselves taken with the sword, you know.
You call it costumes, I call it uniforms.
okay, but, you know, they look like costumes because they're straight out of a movie, you know, and you can just tell the way. It's all just so romantic, and it's just something to do on the weekend, a bit like some of those, you know, battle reenactment people, you know. And, you know, if that's what they want, then fair enough.
Exactly,
you know,
exactly.
You know, so maybe they're not even looking for the real thing. And, you know, I don't think there's any point even going to them and saying, this isn't the real thing, you know. It's like, well, they're just like, just leave me to it. This is what I want.
Yeah,
and,
exactly.
You know, yeah,
exactly.
If I want the real thing, I'll go looking for it, you know.
Nothing ever changed through anger and hate. Things only ever change through peace, in my opinion. Yeah.
Well, I mean,
even if there's a war, the war doesn't end with 50% of the people dying. It ends when the two leaders eventually come together and hammer out a peace. As far as I'm aware, I mean, I'm not a historian.
I mean, I think kind of like even more kind of abstractly is like, well, at the end of the war, there's just nobody left. So there is a peace at the end, right? But I know what you mean. Nothing productive comes from
that's a better way of saying
anger
it. Yes.
and hatred, I think. Yeah. So yeah. And what was the other thing on the level of so the thing of access to good teachers, you know, authentic Chinese Kung Fu teachers who are teaching from the heart and also in harmony with the traditional ideals, possibly that have come from Zen, right, which is a kind of or Chan, which has kind of been a mix of Taoism and Confucianism and Buddhism.
Yep.
For some reason, I'm not sure why it's called Chan Buddhism. Maybe just Buddhism won the competition of the philosophies when when it was all being
because obviously China was a lot more isolated than Japan.
yeah.
And obviously Zen came from Japan and was spread more readily than Chan was, so...
Hold on. The Chan came from China into Japan?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Is that what you're saying? Or
Because you're saying, why do we say Zen and not Chan?
Not that. I'm just saying that it's a mix. It seems to be a mix of traditional Chinese philosophies. I mean, Chinese Buddhism as well, because it seems Chinese kind of like Chineseified Buddhism, and so that mixed with Taoism and Confucianism to make a kind of Zen
and the other 11 schools, yes.
And other cultural influences as well to make some kind of synthesis, like a new synthesis of what was called Chan Buddhism, or which became Zen Buddhism in Japan.
But it became Zen after it was combined with Japanese folk religions and Japanese culture.
What the Japanese call Zen, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Sure. Yes.
But that's why, we've had this conversation before, that's why I always prefer saying Chan to
yes.
Zen.
No,
because,
I agree.
and in answer to your question, we say Zen more in the West now because it was more proliferated with Japanese movement to the West than the Chinese, which was a more isolated culture at the time.
Yeah. I think most Western people think Zen originates in Japan. I mean, of course, with the Shinto clothing and all of this kind of stuff. But so they're kind of right in some ways. But ultimately, it's a Chinese philosophy. Ultimately, and I think there are still big overlaps between them. I've used
of course.
I've used the Japanese Zen art stuff that I'd learned before coming to China in order to kind of filter out the modern Chinese weird stuff that they attach to it, to try and kind of strip it down to what seems to be the original Chinese.
I mean, Dharma, Bodhidharma, he said that the Chan that he started was much closer to the original teachings of that Buddha than what was currently popular in India at the time. So I don't know how much of you're the scholar.
I'm not really, but I mean, I think like all teachers will say that maybe, because they want to kind of claim authentic lineage. Yeah. But it's very difficult to know, isn't it? But in terms of finding that spirit, as you said, of Bodhidharma's spirit, still alive in Chinese Kung Fu in China, a master who's using it to cultivate himself spiritually and to constantly be opening and expanding his mind and body. In your opinion, it's quite difficult to find that now?
I have a personal theory on this, and this is again just a theory. I haven't tested it because I'm too scared to, but I have a feeling, and this goes back to something you were touching on that you want to do for another podcast, the idea of magical abilities.
Okay.
But I think that people concentrate either too much on meditation or too much on Qigong.
Right.
And if you concentrate, according to my theory, on too much of either one, you either get so densely inside your own body that you become isolated, or if you concentrate too much on Qigong, it just sends your energy too high and you start flowing off and just become mentally unstable.
Yeah, sure. Hyperactive,
and you start. You start becoming unhinged from society and the environment in general.
And just to make clear, by meditation, you meant seated meditation.
Seated meditation,
right?
yes.
Yeah, not the moving Kung Fu meditation.
No. And I think that happens too much. Either people concentrate on one side or the other. And I've really started recommending to people, okay, if you want to do seated meditation, great, but factor in some Qigong in there as well. And if you want to do Qigong, that's great, but keep yourself rooted by doing meditation with it. Otherwise, you're going to have one extreme or the other, and life is about balance.
Yeah. Nice.
This is the end of Podcast 1, Part 3, The Shaolin Solution with AJ Donnely.